All right, everyone. So it's 1 here on the East Coast, and as always, we're going to start our call on time. Everyone is now on mute, but when the time comes for questions or comments, I'll tell you how to request unmuting so I can call on you. My name is Azer Cole, and I'm one of 2 Citizen Empowerment Coordinators here at American Promise, and welcome to the American Promise National Citizen Leader Call for September of 2018. It's a call that happens on the second Saturday of each month. And thanks all of you guys who've taken the time out of your busy weekends to join us today, or maybe you couldn't make it live and you're listening to this recording afterwards. Either way, you're stepping up to save our democracy, so thank you. We're honored to have an incredible guest speaker here today, Diane Hessan, a successful researcher, entrepreneur, and author who's personally interviewed over 1,000 voters of all political ideologies and is going to share her insights with us in just a couple minutes here. After we hear from Diane, we're going to hear a grassroots victory from Travis Bicher and his Delaware American Promise Association's recent success of a meeting with their U.S. Senator's office in D.C. and the follow-up, which came next, which is going to fit right into this month's training portion of the call, which is focused on best practices for effective follow-up letters and emails after meetings with elected officials or their staffs. So meeting face-to-face with elected officials is a powerful tool available to us citizens, but it's certainly not the only tool. And this month's action centers around writing letters to the editor with a focus on the candidate pledge. Over 220 elected officials have taken the pledge, and with midterms just around the corner, there's really never been a better time to engage the media in this election cycle. So thanks everyone who's stepping up, and if you're interested in learning more about what it takes to start an American Promise Association in your community, feel free to send me an email at azorc@americanpromise.net. It's azorc@americanpromise.net, and I just wanted to start by sharing this quote from renowned columnist Will Rogers, who wrote, "Politics has become so expensive that it takes a lot of money to even be defeated." I'm going to repeat that. Politics has become so expensive that it takes a lot of money to even be defeated. And it's true. You know, the insane price of running for office makes the thought of throwing your hat in the ring seem and be inaccessible for most people. And I met a candidate 2 weeks ago in Michigan. He's a 26-year-old running for Congress, running a low-budget, high-energy campaign. He certainly wasn't a millionaire. He was being severely outspent, but he'd galvanized an energetic volunteer base because he was outspoken on the issues. And this issue, getting money out of politics, is one that does cut across party lines. And that's something we have to help all members of Congress see. And that's one of the things Diane Hessan is going to touch on, and she's going to do that after she's introduced by Ben Gubitz, Director of Political Strategy for American Promise. Hey, Ben.
Hello, Azer, and hello to all. That's a great quote. Always an honor to be on these Saturday calls with everyone. Really appreciate everyone taking the time out of their busy weekends to step up and get out of the viewing stands and onto the playing field. So very excited to introduce our special guest speaker this month, Diane Hessan, who's a successful entrepreneur, researcher, and author. Diane's also a member of the Boston Globe's editorial board, and last November, Diane wrote an op-ed that I read right when it came out titled, "Are We as Divided as We Think We Are?" And she writes in this, "Perhaps there is a way to move forward by asking questions and empathizing, by talking instead of tweeting, and by thinking about the common ground that we share." Diane's since become a voter expert, personally interviewing over 1,000 voters, going in-depth on major political issues and finding that we are not as divided as we think we are, most certainly in this issue when it comes to money in politics. So we're thrilled to have her here today. Diane, before I turn it over to you, let me give you an idea of the kind of folks that are on this call. You're talking to people like Carol Martin in Ohio, who's part of an American Promise Association. They're developing really strong bonds with their Republican state representatives. And people like Robin Lynn in North Carolina, who's organizing a showing of the documentary Dark Money at her local theater. Also, people like Gary Cox, a Green Party candidate in Ohio, who's not only signed the candidate pledge saying if elected he'll use his office to advance the 28th Amendment, but who's also organizing locally to advance legislative solutions at the same exact time with his American Promise Association. So that's just a little bit of flavor of folks of on this call, and there are many, many more from all over the country. So, Diane, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over now. But, folks, as you're listening to Diane, we're going to have an opportunity to do some Q&A. So if you do have a question that pops up, go ahead and press 1 on your keypad, so then Azer will have the ability to unmute you and call on you when we get to the Q&A portion with Diane. So without further ado, Diane, I will send it on over to you. Really happy to have you on the call.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here. Well, let me jump right in. Let me talk for about 5 or 10 minutes, and then we can open it up to questions. So as both Azer and Ben said, I have spent the larger portion of my political life of my professional life outside of the political arena, and have built a couple of companies. But the largest company I built basically used what we used to call the magic of the internet to help large corporations, big brands, to get insight and inspiration from their consumers. And the breakthrough on the internet was, as opposed to like a focus group, which in my world we call 20th century technology, as opposed to a focus group where you put 10 people in a room for an hour, when you do things online, you can not only get a lot more people, but you don't have to really say goodbye. They don't have to leave the room. You can have the equivalent of hundreds and hundreds of people sitting in a room available to you whenever and wherever you want the information, which ends up being really, really valuable to companies. My background is I got a call from a friend of mine in the Clinton campaign about 2 years ago, basically saying, we're doing all these polls. I'm not really sure that we're understanding what's going on. We got a lot about the what, but not the why. Do you have any ideas? And I said, oh my gosh, do I have ideas? How long do you have? So to make a long story short, after we had that conversation, they asked if I would help the campaign, in particular, understand voters in purple states and particularly undecided voters. And I did that basically from the spring of 2006 until the end of the election. And when everything was over, I was about to start another company, and I decided, well, first, let me just write an op-ed about what I've been doing and what I learned and what I think it means. And the op-ed went viral. It was all about Hillary Clinton's calling half of Trump supporters, putting half of Trump supporters in a basket of deplorables. And the op-ed went viral. I think the reason it did was that it was published the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, which was right around when everyone out there was worried about going home and having dinner with their families and screaming and yelling at each other. So all of a sudden, everyone wanted to know what I was up to, and I decided not to stop. I recruited a brand new group of consumers, and I now basically on a weekly basis online, I'm interacting with 500 voters from all ends of the political spectrum, from every state, every age, and so on. And I basically speak with them online and ask them questions on a weekly basis. If there's something that they want to talk about emotionally, I get on the phone with them. I interviewed all of them over the phone. And this group has been just extraordinary in terms of being as candid as possible with me, opening up their lives, and we actually have a lot of fun with each other. Sometimes I'm asking them polling questions. Sometimes I'll send them a video and ask them to respond. Sometimes we do Mad Libs. Sometimes I do true-false tests. And I write op-eds essentially when I find something that I think is really compelling or surprising. So just with those last couple of introductions from Ben, Rob and Lynn, I've got tons of voters in North Carolina. North Carolina ended up being the only state where people were obsessive over gerrymandering, which I thought was very interesting. And Gary, you're from Ohio. I literally, before this call, just got off the phone with one of my voters from Columbus who was at the Trump rally last week. So just lots of really interesting, rich data. And the goal that I've got is I've been looking for common ground. So my basic philosophy is you can't accomplish much without walking in the shoes of everyone, including the other side. So just in general, as it relates to American Promise and the important work that all of you are doing, I guess I'd say a couple of things. Number one, as much as many of the people on the call, my guess is not all of you, but there are many people out there who believe that our president is a bad actor. It's really, really important to compartmentalize. So just because somebody voted for Trump or supports Trump doesn't mean that they're also some bad actor. I mean, sure, there are people who are deplorable who are in the Trump camp. But if I had to pick one of the biggest learnings from my research, it's for the last 21 months I have gotten to know incredible, wonderful citizens in our country who support the president. They know what my politics are. I know what theirs are. I did a big project with them last month asking just the Trump voters in my sample how they can all support someone who lies on a daily basis. And essentially what I learned from them is they believe that all politicians lie. And when I asked for specifics, of course, I got everything from you can keep your doctor all the way through to I didn't have sex with that woman. So, just to give you a little more color on this, I think one of the things that's important, you probably all already know this, given the conversations that you're having, but many of the issues that Americans struggle with the most are the same, no matter who you voted for. The cost of childcare, education, housing, whether you feel safe, whether you have access to reliable transportation, whether you will be able to age at home. So in other words, people who voted very differently from us often want the same thing. They want to make ends meet and support their families. They want to ensure that their children can have better lives than they do. They want a government that protects them from disasters and a system that treats them fairly. And under Trump, many voters have another average $250 a month in their paychecks, which is far from crumbs for them. So when any politician, Republican, Democrat, Independent, commits to improving the lives of people who have been left behind, there is the potential to have a very broad coalition of voters who nod their heads and cheer and feel seen. I guess for all of you, the best news I have is that most Americans, right now my data says close to 90%, believe that Washington is broken. So although Make America Great Again is seen as this brilliant rallying cry, at least on the media, the message about draining the swamp resonated much more with everyone across the political spectrum, and it still does. So most voters, if you ask them about Washington, they describe it as rife with greed, grift, bureaucracy, and as one person said, reminiscent of a bog full of disease-carrying mosquitoes. They believe our government is bureaucratic and wasteful. They talk about cabinet secretaries from Goldman Sachs hanging out in the Oval Office and then leaving and taking expensive flights and buying expensive furniture. And they are convinced that there's way too much big money in politics. The rich, the NRA, pharmaceutical companies, and especially lobbyists whose activity surged to over $3 billion last year. So this is an enormous opportunity for new leadership, not just from people who are in formal jobs, but from people like you, knowing that if we're in the swamp, if we're up to our necks in alligators, we can bring confidence back in our democracy. So it's all of this stuff is just a huge opportunity for American Promise. So what? When you talk to people, I will tell you that it's amazing how much ground you can cover and how, one of the laws in marketing is persuasion is the process of involving the customer. That if all you do is talk, it's really difficult to convince people of things. But when you're curious and you ask a lot of questions, expect to start nodding your head a lot and to have messages that resonate more. So when you're with people, ask them about draining the swamp. Ask them about Washington and, what makes them insane about it. Ask them how long they felt that way, if it changed under Trump, and if so, how. Ask them if they had ideas. you will find that their answers make you nod your head and walk in their shoes. Don't tell them they're wrong. Get examples. And in other words, be a researcher. I promise you that if you do this, you will hear the common ground. You'll hear the opportunity. And then, for instance, when you talk about Citizens United, you can talk about it in their language. Okay, you hate all of those Goldman Sachs guys in the cabinet. Well, that's what we're fighting for, to make sure that every American has a say rather than the rich buying their own influence and so on. So just to summarize, don't make assumptions about who you're talking to just because of what party you're in. Seek to understand, be curious, be a researcher, and know that the issue that American Promise is working on is one that most Americans can support, as long as you explain it in a way that connects with and really feels personalized to them and their lives. So let me just stop here and see what you think and answer any questions that you have.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Diane, and really for sharing your unique and interesting lens that you have into the electorate. I particularly liked, saying you can't accomplish much without walking in the other side's shoes. That exercise in empathy is really so important. And if folks have questions, please press 1. Press 1 on your keypad to raise your hand so I know to call on you here. And it's really similar, Diane, what you talked about, just the whole relationship building approach, which we talk about so much. But it looks like someone has their hand up. So H. Kelly, I'm going to unmute you. Please shout out your name, where you're calling in from, and what your question is.
Helen Kelly from the East Bay of San Francisco, former in-house legal counsel for what is now known as Target Stores, former criminal prosecutor for the Minnesota State Attorney General's office. I have spent several years trying to figure out how to fix our broken system. I now have a series of tools I have designed. Who can I talk to? Diane, how would I reach you so you have a network of people where someone can act on it, or if American Promise can act on it?
So you mean you have some best practices, Helen, that you feel like you can share?
I have designed some tools to immediately elevate and accentuate the efforts of American Promise and the people of both political parties.
Yeah. So that's great. For my group, the purpose of my group is they know that this is largely research. So I never tell them what to do, what to think, all of that. But I have a feeling that what you've got would be really, really valuable to American progress. Yes, Azor?
Yeah, thanks for sharing,
American
Helen.
Promise, sorry.
If you want, there's American Promise Connect, AP Connect, where folks all across the country are, sort of collaborating in just similar ways that you described. And if you go to our website and in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see log in, and that could be a really exciting avenue to connect with other folks, or you could always follow up with me individually. So thank you for sharing that. And if the other folks have questions, please press 1 on your keypad, as we've got some time for Q&A with Diane Hessan here. It looks like someone has their hand up. All right, Richard Asimus. Richard, where are you calling in from, and what is your question?
I'm from Cincinnati, Ohio, and Diane, I'm interested in ways that you see that your research and the curiosity, and I love all that, and really drawing people out, how it turns then into action or into perhaps collective or cooperative action.
Yeah. Thanks for the question, Richard. Well, what I try to do whenever, if you just kind of Google my name and Boston Globe, which is where I've been putting all of my articles, one of the things I'm trying to do is to, write my insights and then say, okay, so what? So what does this mean we need to do? Sometimes I get really prescriptive. I'll say, for instance, voters don't really believe that the Democrats have a message other than resist Trump. Here are the themes that work. or, I'll give people advice on here's how to speak differently. Here's what you need to read, what you need to think about. Sometimes I think what I'm just doing is educating people, giving them another side of the story and giving them other kinds of perspective or things like that. Because, the goal here is to eliminate some of the divisiveness. I mean, I will tell you that 2/3 of the country pretty much agrees on a lot of things that you would believe divide us on. There's huge common ground on immigration, on gun control, on health care, certainly on draining the swamp. And so sometimes this is just to help people in whatever way they possibly can have some firepower so that they can go and take action.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for the question, Richard. And I'd imagine just talking through some of the issues, gives people an outlet to think through their positions. And when money and politics issues in particular, a lot of people agree that there's a problem but don't think there's anything they can do about it. Which makes the importance of sort of citizen advocacy and having active people in the grassroots level all across the country, much like everyone on this call is doing, all the more important. It looks like Shelley Stokes has had her hand up for a little bit. So, Shelley, you're unmuted. Where are you calling in from, and what is your question?
Okay. Yes, I'm calling from Alexandria, Virginia. And, Diane, thank you so much for all your research and your information. You had mentioned that close to 90% believe Washington is broken, and I'm trying to find out what poll that was based off of.
So that's based, Shelley, just off of my conversations with all of these 500 voters. So it's not a poll. Now, so one of the things I do is I might in 1 week say true or false, right? And I'll go through things. And one of them would be, Washington is broken, true or false. In that particular one, I'd have to go back and look at exactly what I asked. But I believe in that particular one, that's basically what I asked. And over 90% of the people said true. Then I did a lot of digging in general after that into draining the swamp. How much does that resonate with you? Do you feel that Donald Trump is making progress draining the swamp? What is the swamp to you? What does that mean? Is that money? Is that a person? Is that bureaucracy or whatever? And, just kind of going back and forth with people writing things.
Fantastic. Thank you for that question and explanation. Let's go over to Kevin Allen Goldman. Kevin, you're unmuted. Where are you calling in from, and what is your question?
Hi, I'm calling in from Phoenix, Arizona, and I've actually got a couple of questions. The first one, first of all, Diane, thank you for speaking about this. The first one is when I come across people who are disagreeing online on social media, I often want to jump in and I try to be as standoffish as possible, but to still try and make a different side see things the way that I see it as well, just so they can at least have another opinion. So is there a way to do this through social media that you find to be different from the way that you do this by reaching out directly to someone in person?
Yeah, that's a great question, Kevin. Let me tell you what doesn't work on social media. What doesn't work is, Kevin, how can you even say that? Because you're wrong, right?
Right.
I think, for instance, when I write stuff on social media, there are plenty of people who say, you're a fraud. You never talk to anybody. I think this is wrong. I talked to somebody last week who felt differently or whatever. And what I try to do is to start by saying, well, that's really interesting. Thank you for the feedback. If it's directed right at me, I thank them for the feedback and I try to get more information on where they're coming from. So I think part of it is if you're on social media, you can say, that's really interesting. Tell me where you found that, because I see all kinds of conflicting data on this issue.
Okay.
Sometimes you can get more pointed. I'm doing a deep dive right now with all my voters on immigration. So this morning, I got one of my voters who's wonderful, and she's a bus driver in Pennsylvania, and she thinks that the country should be locked, like no one should come in. And the primary reason that she feels that way is when she hears illegal immigrant, she hears criminal. And so I wrote back to her and I said, Brenda, I'm just curious. So number one, I always love hearing from you. Thank you so much for your perspective. And I picked something that she said that I think is really great. And then I said to her, I'm just curious. If you look at the data, the rate of crime among illegal immigrants is actually way lower than for the average American citizen. Happy to send you the data. So tell me a little bit more about what your issue is. I mean, is it just one more crime that turns you off? Like, tell me more about what's going on. And sometimes I get back to people and I ask them things like that, and they'll say, well, the data's different all over the place. Or, oh, I was stressed and, wasn't really sure. It's all so confusing. And sometimes people will go back and forth. But, you're not going to change somebody's mind responding to a tweet. So if you want to really engage with them, you got to ask the questions. You can do the same thing on social media as with anywhere else. I have found that people have written to me on social media because they've read something I've written, and they've been really upset. And probably about a dozen of my 500 voters are people who originally came to me because they were screaming and yelling at me on social media. And I finally got to them and said, look, you and I don't agree, but I want to hear more about your perspective, and, now we're friends.
That makes a lot of sense, and I'd imagine social media yelling back and forth is something that just wears so much on a whole bunch of folks. And Kevin, we'll come back to you if we've got time. We've only got a couple more minutes, and I want to make sure that other folks get a chance to ask their questions. So, Tina, I'm going to call on you. Tina, you're unmuted. Where are you calling in from, and what is your question?
I'm calling in from California, and I'm wondering why we still can't get the media coverage of the huge foreclosure problem that is ongoing, with the fraud that is ongoing within that. It seems to have been brushed aside, and neither party has done what they could have done and should have done to stop the raping of the country and to stop the homelessness. Why is it that it's been brushed aside, and how can we get this back in the forefront? It is going on right now.
Yeah, that makes sense, Tina. Do you want to take that one, Diane? I'd be happy to as well.
I mean, from my perspective, just because I sit on an editorial board, I will tell you that newspapers are, at least from the newspaper point of view, and I'm sure this applies to other media, people are always looking for content. And it is really interesting that sometimes, for instance, you're in California, sometimes you get people really, really focused on what's happening in Sacramento. And it just snowballs, and all of a sudden it's all about legislation going on in Sacramento or whatever. I think that writing a letter to the editor really helps, because there are two audiences for letters to the editor. One is, if it gets printed, people who are reading the newspaper write it. But very often you've got an editorial board reading the letters to the editor saying, gee, that's really interesting. We don't write about that very much. So people are always looking for great content, and if you have something new that you believe is not being covered and you can send them some data on it, it's really amazing how interested I find people are, in getting more information. I think the other thing, Tina, that really helps is if you can connect it to a current issue that's going on that you feel is getting written about or talked about a lot.
Mm-hmm.
That also helps.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think if it's okay, Diane, we've got time for one more question. Is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
Great. Well, let's circle back to Kevin. I know he said he had more than one. So, Kevin, one more question. You're unmuted here as we round out this portion of the call.
Yeah, Kevin, you're last, so you have to have a really brilliant question.
No pressure. Thank you. So my other question then, I guess if I have to choose among them, would be since you do this kind of research, Diane, and you have information that you can point people to with these 500 voters that you talk to, is there any way that you can connect us with the information that you have so that we can connect people we know with that information?
Yeah, so first of all, whenever I find something, obviously, you have to trust me on this one, but whenever I find something that I think is surprising or really compelling, I write about it. So, for instance, when I mentioned this drain the swamp thing, if you just Google my name, Diane Hessan, Hessan, if you Google my name and Boston Globe and drain the swamp, up will pop an article that I wrote last February called The Muck and Mud in Washington, How Voters See It, and that'll give you a deep dive on draining the swamp. You can also just find, you can kind of get your favorite issue. I've written about everything from what the deal is with Trump's rally and what that really means to, where I really think our common ground is, to how people have felt about Charlottesville, about gun control, about taking a knee, what's going on with independents who are unhappy with both parties. And you can literally just find that stuff. It just all pops up. So it's all in the public domain. And, you're welcome to send it around. If there's something specific that you want to know about and you're just not able to find it by Googling, you can always feel free to just write to me. It's dhessan@gmail.com, and I'll do whatever I can to send you the information that I have.
Great. Well, thank you again, Diane, for being here. This insight is valuable everywhere, but particularly in places where we're advocating for, cross-partisan solutions, and that, training in empathy is so vital to the success of a relationship and the success of, a legislative co-sponsor, for example. So again, just a huge thank you for taking the time.
Well, thank you all for doing such important work. I'm really, really optimistic about what you're doing. I mean, I think it's so important. And I think that there's more divisiveness in Washington and in the media than there is in the country. But the views of people about what's happening, and particularly what's happening related to Citizens United, are surprisingly aligned. And so I'm very optimistic that if you keep up the good work, we're going to have some great progress. So thanks for what you're all doing.
Of course, yeah. I've found that, more and more the people who are actually doing the work, there's not much cynicism or pessimism at all. Optimism is the name of the game, which is just incredible. And it's really showing, in the activity and in the grassroots just advocacy realm. And before we get to our grassroots victory, I want to share some of the actions that folks have taken recently, which are really indicative of this growth. Last year, APA members had 17 meetings with elected officials or their staff, and just last month, there were over 14 meetings with elected officials or their staff, for a total of 119 meetings so far this year, up from 17 just last year. And last year, APA members had 26 media pieces published, and last month alone, there were 12 media pieces published, totaling 63 published so far this year. And our goal is 106 for the year, and if we keep this pace up, we'll be right there, over 4 times more than we were last year. I'm just thinking back to that question I believe Tina asked, how do we get coverage for issues that we care about? A lot of it is just what you said, Diane, letters to the editor, building relationships with your editorial boards, with your local political reporters. And the only way to do that is to write something, make a phone call, build a relationship, and really be the change that you're working to manifest. We really want to make sure that we know about these meetings with elected officials and media pieces so we can include them in these exciting totals. So if you're having meetings with elected officials or having media pieces published, go to AmericanPromise.net, and on the Take Action drop-down menu, you'll see the Citizen Uprising reporting forms option and see the correct way to report this so we can be tracking this and letting folks know of the exciting progress, because the growth we're seeing really is exciting and indicative of more and more people stepping up and getting involved to get big money out of politics. And I'm now thrilled to pass it over to Travis Bicher. He's the legislator and candidate outreach director for the Delaware American Promise Association, and one of these media pieces in these tallies is actually from him. He recently had an op-ed published in the Delaware Online titled "The Fight Against Money in Politics Has Momentum," highlighting the group's success in utilizing the candidate pledge. And an integral piece of this successful candidate outreach work, is this type of engagement, which of course you can then follow with great and effective follow-up, which is what Travis is going to talk about, sharing his experience and the group's experience of successfully having a meeting with their U.S. Senator in D.C. this past summer, and then following up with the office after having the meeting and how best to do that. So Travis, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the call.
All right. Thank you, Azer. As you noted, I'm Travis Bicher, calling in from Claymont, Delaware, the Delaware APA down here. So just wanted to speak a bit about my experience with lobbying the office of Senator Carper. So back on lobby day after the MCLC, we had a meeting with someone from his staff. The person we were originally supposed to sit down with, Joe, was the campaign finance specialist. And he was someone I had met with before as part of Move to Amend, but unfortunately he ended up being sick that day, so we got to meet another person, Andrew, who worked on healthcare and education. And a lot of our group's personal concerns that we were bringing up, because that's a lot of what our meetings were, how these different issues tie into money in politics. So a lot of people are concerned about student loan debt, about the cost of health care. And the meeting went pretty well because he really dug in on things. So I ended up sending a follow-up email, a thank you email, to both Joe and Andrew the next day after I got home. Didn't manage to do it that day. But I followed up with Joe in a couple weeks, as Andrew had suggested, reminding him of the specific asks that we had made in the meeting. So Joe is pretty good about responding to asks. He's done so in the past, even if it's not a positive thing that they'll act on, he still says something about it. So in this case, he said Carper was still a no on introducing the We the People Amendment, HJR 48, into the Senate, which I've asked about him before. He said he would keep the Campaign Finance Reform Caucus in mind, even though he wasn't able to attend when we asked that time. And he had reached out to the press team about our op-ed collaboration idea, but I didn't end up getting any contact info. One good thing I did get out of that was a general schedule of Carper's availability for an in-state meeting. It was like Mondays and Fridays. He travels back and forth between the Delaware and Washington a lot. I never did hear from anyone on the press team, so I tried to keep bugging him on that. And in July, I hit him a couple times. First time, I was sharing an op-ed from one of our membership on healthcare and money in politics, Judy Butler. And then later, I was asking for a statement for my own op-ed summarizing the NSCLC and the pledge campaign that Azer had mentioned. With that email, he said he passed it on to the press team, but again, nothing back. So at this point, I decided we would move for a meeting, so I put in a request with Carper's office in Wilmington through his website, and I referenced the previous D.C. meeting, and we ended up getting a meeting last Friday. Notably, we had quite a few volunteers who wanted to go to this meeting, like 8 or 9, so when I double-checked with the office about confirming the meeting, I let them know, hey, we have this many people. And it was a good thing that I did because they said we would barely fit and we wouldn't want anybody more than that. We had a lot of people who are excited to have an actual meeting with Senator Carper himself. And since it's not often we get to do that, I wanted to bring out the numbers. Unfortunately, that ended up being rescheduled to the 17th because Carper had to attend the service for John McCain in D.C. My takeaway from all of this would be that you have to be persistent in your follow-up with legislators since emails get ignored, people get sick, and it's quite easy for your communications to get lost in the shuffle. That said, I had a very similar approach to what I described for the offices of our sole representative, Lisa Blunt Rochester, and Senator Chris Coons, and I got very little response there comparatively. The main differences I would think about there was that the immediate follow-up was faster. They had said, get back to us in a week after the meeting. And then I think the more important thing, though, was that Carper had a strong primary challenger, Carrie Evelyn Harris, who had signed the candidate pledge, whereas Rochester had no primary challenger and Coons wasn't up for election. So I'd say that persistence is important, but you also have to be able to apply pressure in other ways by the activities that your group's doing, but then also getting like challengers and so on, people who really care about this issue to be signing the pledge, and then it seems to be the thing to do. So that's my 2 bits on that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Travis. And it's exciting to hear all of the work that you and the Delaware APA are accomplishing. I'm just going to echo what you said. Persistence is the word, and really pushing all avenues available to citizens, being an active citizen, the importance of that, just in making our democracy stronger. It's going to be infinite times better if people are actively engaging rather than just being passive consumers say. That's not going to be a working democracy at all. So thank you again. And again, just congratulations on the continued success out in Delaware.
Wish us luck for the meeting.
Thank you. Yep, certainly will. And all these folks on the call, I'm sure will wish you luck too. It's going to be a good one. If there's anyone on the call who's not yet in an APA and wants to learn more about starting one, doing things like Travis and the group in Delaware are doing, send me an email at azorc@americanpromise.net. It's AZORC as in cat at americanpromise.net. And now we're going to go through this month's action. Travis sort of alluded to 1 or 2 of the activities, but this month's action is generating support for the 28th Amendment and the candidate pledge through well-written letters to the editor. And with the 2018 midterm elections only a couple weeks away, 2 short months or so, this pledge campaign is really an excellent opportunity to use the media to engage candidates and the public on the importance of a 28th Amendment and a chance to win more champions in offices across the nation for this important work. So you all have this action sheet in your inbox in an email sent from me yesterday, and it's sort of, instead of walking through it point by point, I thought it might be better just to ask if there's anyone on the call right now who's ever had a letter to the editor published. It doesn't necessarily have to be about the candidate pledge, but if you have, would you please press 1 on your keypad and share with the group, just how you did it, what sort of the process was like. It looks like Ishwari has her hand up, APA leader out in Santa Fe. Ishwari, where are you calling in from? I sort of gave it away, but how did you get a letter to the editor published?
Yeah, just sending it in, and we have our local paper does 2 versions of a letter to the editor. One is only allowed to have 150 words, which is very short. The other is called a My View, and it's allowed to have 600. So I had to decide, each time I've done this, which approach I was going to take, and I found that they were willing. If I wrote a My View, there was one point where they said this probably would be better as a letter to the editor, and they kind of rewrote it for me, and we went back and forth and came up with something. So it's just submitting, something that's as well written as you can do, and as I've learned through the training through American Promise, always trying to tie it to something they've already published, so that they know that you're a reader, they know that you're engaged in the topic. It isn't just out of the blue that you're, sending this information in. So I think that's an important piece.
Yeah, absolutely. That was something Diane touched on too, tying it to a current event, best yet a local current event. And, there's so many things that money in politics affects. That's a really effective skill. Thank you for sharing that insight, Ishwari.
Sure.
It looks like Chris Corfanta has their hand up. So Chris, you're unmuted. Where are you calling in from? And, what's your experience been like in submitting letters to the editor?
Hi, I'm from Wyoming, and we've submitted about 15, 20 letters to editor this year, and I'm sorry we have not reported it. I didn't know how to put all of them in. Anyway, have a group of us who meet twice a month, and we've contacted people in our area to ask them to write a letter to the editor. And we have a small newspaper that's pretty good about getting letters in, but then the Billings Gazette and the Casper Star, two bigger cities nearby, will often also print it. And we've had very good luck getting letters in. One of the things we try to do that it seems to work really well is have somebody else read it, somebody unfamiliar with the topic, to make sure we've said it right. And we found the shorter the better. We get a lot more feedback on the shorter letters than the longer letters.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, Chris. And I stumbled across many of those letters to the editor just by having Google AdWords turned on. I'm always getting alerts from the Wyoming Promise group out there, raging in its ballot initiative statewide, just lighting up the media. So I'm seeing those and appreciate all the activity. But I think your insight is right. You can submit it to multiple places, pretend that no one knows anything going into reading the letter, making it clear and concise. So thanks for everything you're doing and for sharing that insight. It looks like one more person has their hand up, but then we'll move on. So Eileen, you're unmuted. Where are you calling in from, and what's your experience been like in submitting letters to the editor? All right, we might have lost Eileen here. So we're going to move on and just reiterate, all of these tips, are spot on. It's an accessible tool to citizens. It might take some persistence, to borrow a word from Travis, but you certainly can get them published. And once you get one published, there's no reason why you can't have one published a month with the friendly editorial board who's interested in what you've got to say. Going back sort of to the specific action and tying in letters to the editor with candidate pledge activity, that's a really newsworthy thing to send into a newspaper. And I know folks across the country are doing it, saying, Congresswoman so-and-so or candidate for X district has signed the candidate pledge saying if elected, she'll use her office to advance a constitutional amendment saying that money is not speech and corporations shouldn't have the same rights as people. And we've sent out inquiries to the other, one or two candidates running in this same district and urge, voters to care about money and politics issues come election day. Folks are starting to write letters to the editor in that vein, really substantive pieces, and having them published just in droves, which is just fantastic. And we're going to transition now a little bit to the training portion of this call, and the training really is on how to have the most effective follow-up, what Travis was talking about earlier, the most effective follow-up with an elected official's office after you've had the meeting. So, say you've scheduled your meeting with your member of Congress in this example. You've had it, it went really well, or maybe it just went okay. But either way, follow-up is the name of the game. Good follow-up, a follow-up letter, or an email in particular could be the difference between making something that was promised in the meeting happen or not happen. So I know we heard some good tips, from Travis earlier, but just keeping it collaborative and open, please press 1 on your keypad if you want to just shout out some of the key components of an effective follow-up letter, and then we'll sort of go over it all together at the end. But does anyone want to take a shot at this? If you do, go ahead and press 1 on your keypad and just shout out, 1, or you could even do 2 if you wanted. Key components of effective follow-up. Looks like APA leader in New Jersey, Marie, has her hand up. So Marie, you're unmuted. Where are you calling in from, and what's some effective components of follow-up?
Hi, calling from Cherry Hill, New Jersey, from Tri-County, New Jersey, APA. I think it's really important to number one, thank the member of Congress or the staff member for their time and for their interest, and to specify whatever your ask was in the meeting, to lay that out again and to review what the if you had some agreement of they're going to get back to you in 2 weeks, or or whatever it was, to reiterate that in the email. So there's a plan of action that you can go back and forth and check in with.
Absolutely. Thanking them for something is very first thing on my list, and reiterating the asks, certainly a crucial piece of any follow-up. Thanks for that, Marie. It looks like Helen Kelly has her hand back up. So, Helen, you're unmuted. Remind folks where you're calling in from and what's a piece of effective follow-up.
I think I'm from East Bay of San Francisco, and I think it's very important to let them know in that very complimentary, thankful letter follow-up that you will be following up again, that you're not going away. With respect to my congressman, for 4 years I've been trying to go to his town hall meetings and discuss the issue of the corruption as a result of Citizens United, and he refuses to talk to me. He is dancing a dance, just like in the book Confessions of Congressman X, where they will tell you anything you want to hear just to get you off their back. They are not there representing us, but representing the monies. And so you need to know how to handle a follow-up, and get that message across to them so that you don't go away. So if they resolve it now or take some action now on behalf of your request, that it will save them a lot in the long run.
Yeah, that's a good point. You're not going to have one just dynamite meeting or even an okay meeting with a member of Congress or an elected officials usually and walk out and have everything you asked for done right there. It's going to take follow-up, and it's probably going to take a subsequent number of meetings. So that point about in your follow-up referencing the next time or requesting a meeting for the next time is a huge piece as you develop and build a strong relationship up over time. Anyone else want to share a couple components or just one component of effective follow-up? Everything so far that's been shared has been absolutely spot on, and we'll give folks maybe a couple seconds here if people want to round out this portion of the call. Everything so far has been just incredible. I don't know, Helen, Marie, you guys might have nailed it according to folks on this call. It looks like someone's raised their hand, APA leader in Ohio. Ellen, where in Ohio are you calling in from, and what's an effective piece of follow-up?
This is Ellen. I'm from Port Clinton, Ohio. I was just going to add that now that there are everybody's running for office, there often are a lot of small get-togethers with candidates there. And one thing that we have found effective is to go to some of those get-togethers and try to get our message across. If there's a candidate that said he or she was going to sign and didn't, we have a chance to kind of bug them again. But Carolyn Martin and I just went to an event and had quite a little bit of success with people there. So it's another thought if you have time.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, effective follow-up online is good, but being able to put your face to your words for your elected official, I'm sure is really helpful. And going to those community events, public events, if your elected official has them, just makes a whole great amount of sense. So thank you for that, Ellen. So I think everyone pretty much hit the nail on the head. On my list is first and foremost, thank them for the meeting. Remind them which day it was and what time it was at, and then thank your member of Congress, your elected official, whoever it is, your candidate, for their work on a particular issue, something specific that they can say, Ellen in Ohio or Marie in New Jersey took the time to research my candidacy, and they know something about it, and they're appreciative. I like that. Mentioning any personal connection that was made during the meeting, maybe it's, my kid goes to that college too, or maybe it's, oh man, I really like that restaurant on X Street too. Anything that, felt particularly coincidental or just personally funny during the meeting is good to reference. And fourth, provide any materials you promised to provide or answer any questions you couldn't answer and promise to get back to them on during the meeting. And then fifth, what Marie said, reiterating the primary and secondary asks, and especially the relevant next steps. Next, asking what we can do to make it easier for this elected official or candidate for public office to support and lead on a 28th Amendment, really by asking what we can do to make it easier, showing that we want to work together. We're your constituents. We're, here to help you do a good job, and vice versa. And last, if you met with an aide or a staff member for this elected official, ask for a meeting with your actual elected official in the follow-up. And if you did meet with the elected official, ask for a follow-up meeting, as Helen was saying, with them in the next month or two. All just effective components of follow-up, which, sometimes it feels like, oh man, you had the big meeting, you've been preparing, you had it, it went great. Whew, we're done. Follow-up. It's so crucial. We've got about 5 minutes before 2 here. I don't know if anyone has any other questions or comments that they didn't get to ask throughout the call. It could be about follow-up, or it could be about something that we didn't touch on. It looks like Helen has her hand back up. Helen, calling in from San Francisco, I believe. You're unmuted.
Okay, I do want to mention again the book that I just stumbled across called Confessions of Congressman X. And it was a Minnesota-based author, but he does not identify a particular congressman. And it was a good friend of his, and he met with him years and years and years and wrote down everything that Congressman X was saying. And the net result is they are not working for us. They'll tell us anything we want to hear. So your recommendations about documenting, following up, more meetings is very essential. And I have a personal experience of writing to a number of congressmen with respect to the corruption of one bank, One West Bank, based in California, whose CEO now is the Secretary of the Treasury. And I never got one response from any member of Congress, even the chairs of the different key committees that were in charge of investigating this. I didn't even get a response from the Attorney General Holder. I did not get a response from the FBI, even when I went to the San Francisco offices for an effort to have a meeting. So they're all going to dance to avoid, based upon the knowledge I got out of Confessions of Congressman X. They only care about keeping their jobs.
Confessions of Congressman X. Sheesh. Let's thanks for sharing that, Helen, and let's go to Marie. Marie, you're unmuted here.
Hi, I was actually a follow-up to the NCLC, and where the position statement for the Republican congressman was introduced to be offered to the Republican members of Congress, where the lobby day meetings were held. And I was wondering what the follow-up to that was, since I don't have a Republican congressman.
So you're
was anyone interested? Any offices seem to come on board with that?
There's definitely growing interest, and part of the job now is, for all the folks who had meetings with their Republican elected officials at the National Citizen Leadership Conference, having those second meetings and third meetings, and slowly bringing folks on board. So I don't have a specific update right now. But, just by doing all the things we're talking about, there certainly will be exciting ones in the future. I think we've got time for just one more quick comment. I'm going to pass it over to Ellen Greenbush in Ohio just to close us out here. Ellen, you're unmuted. I don't know if you had your hand up from an earlier comment. You might have.
Yeah, sorry, I had muted myself because I had
no problem.
And stuff. I have found that some of the candidates who have signed the pledge, and I have mostly Democrats, are interested in reaching Republican, middle-of-the-road kind of voters, and especially women. And I wondered if it would be possible for us to develop some kind of a one-sheet message that candidates could use to get across some of the statistics, but some of the messages we want to get out to constituents that might help them appeal to people in that sort of middle 20% of voters.
Yeah, I think that's something we I think that's something we certainly could put together, and I'll probably circle back with you offline, Ellen, on specifics for that. Thank you for that comment, and it's about 2 here, so I'm gonna we're gonna end on time as always, and I'm gonna unmute everyone here, so we can all say goodbye and talk next month, if not sooner. So thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your Saturday.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
God bless America.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.